Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of my indie game project called Pharaoh's Trap. In the previous episode, we tweaked the player controller to make the game more responsive and snappy. So now in this episode, we're going to be putting that movement to the test by making some deadly traps to kill the player. Let's get into it. First off, I loaded a testing level I made during the game jam that I used to test some of the behaviors for the traps without messing up the real levels. Although, that test level was looking a little empty. So I used that as a base and started adding in all the traps that are currently in the game. While I was adding the old traps, I figured I might as well fix a few issues with their code before starting to make some of the new traps, so that the bugs wouldn't pile up later. After the previous traps were polished and ready to go, one of the first new traps I wanted to add was a fireball. Since we already had a lava sprite, I figured the fireball could shoot out of the lava like the ones in Mario. So I got to work on the fireball's implementation. I got it up and running pretty quickly since I just reused the projectile code again, but added a 2D rigid body to the fireball so that it falls back down. But when it came time to spawning them in correctly, there were some issues that I encountered on the way there. I spent quite a bit just playing around with it because I thought it looked pretty cool. Especially after I added a bouncy material to its rigid body and started playing around with the post-processing effects. There was this one comment I read in one of my previous videos that said these bugs are just like happy little accidents, and I couldn't agree more.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
In the end, I still had to fix the bug, but at least I got some fun out of it. So that was nice. I then took the platformers that I had before and wanted to make a version that breaks when you step on it. So I used some of the shaking code that I had from the falling blocks and repurposed it so that the platforms will shake before breaking, to give some feedback to the player. I just had to tweak the shaking a bit because that seems like a bit too much. It's still pretty simple for now, but I'll improve it once I get some better art for these platforms instead of just reusing the normal pass-through platforms. Then I started working on a flamethrower trap. And with the help of the new ToonFX particles that we got, the flamethrower trap ended up looking really good. The only issue now was that there was a lot of duplicated code with the arrow trap and the flamethrower trap, since they kind of do the same thing but in different ways. But having duplicated code is a big no-no in programming. So it was time to refactor. And since I was gonna refactor some of the traps, I might as well add some features that I really wanted in as well. I went through a few iterations of how I wanted to refactor the classes, and ended up with a system where I made two types of base classes. A time trigger, which activates on a set interval that I can change, and a detection trigger that only activates once the player has entered its collision trigger. And because of the way I set it up, the arrow trap and flamethrower trap can swap between the two triggers without having separate classes for them, whereas before that wasn't the case. And not only just that, I also applied the same concepts to the spike traps as well, since it was easy to add. And now I have a timed and detection version of each of the traps. Anyways, all that nerdy refactoring stuff aside, now that I had all these traps, I started running out of space inside of my testing room. I didn't want to keep building out horizontally, as that would make it take too long just to get to some of the traps. So instead I thought, why not go vertically? I started setting up a test area above the player, but then it hit me. How the hell am I supposed to get up there? I added these platforms on the side, but it still takes a little while to get to them and then jump all the way up. There must be a better way. And then I remembered what one of my favorite games once taught me. You just have to start thinking with portals. So I made a simple portal system with these circles that can teleport the player between the two areas. And because of the way I set it up, it works for enemies and other projectiles as well, like the arrow trap. But since I don't have much plans to add this to the final game, I didn't bother adding any special effects or anything. Maybe later down the line I'll take a look at it again? But for now, this will work fine, and I can get to my traps quickly as well. Now, let's get to designing some levels. Usually when making levels, I like to slowly build out the level from the beginning. Which works alright, it's just very slow. But my dad suggested a better way to design levels, which is to take an image of an already designed level and use that as a template. Surprisingly, it doesn't even have to be for the same type of game. The image that I ended up using is supposed to be a top-down view of a D&D dungeon that I just rotated so that it's on its side. This ends up working surprisingly well for me, because then I don't really have to think about the bounds of the level. I just follow the map and it creates all the rooms and connecting hallways for me. Then all I need to do is fill those areas with whatever I want, like platforming sections, traps, or even enemies. I wanted to spice things up a bit, so I tried making my own trap gauntlet that the player has to make their way through. I started off just using arrow traps that apparently shot physics-defying arrows. It was a simple issue to solve, but even then, it didn't feel deadly enough. So after messing around with some of the other traps I implemented, I got to something that I really liked. So without further ado, I present to you the Hallway of Fire. With traps spewing flames left and right, this deadly area will mean doom for any After I was done with that, I continued blocking out the level. Because of this method, it only ended up taking around 10 minutes to finish staging the first level. Hopefully this method helps out anyone else out there that also has difficulty coming up with interesting designs for levels. It might not be the be-all end-all, but at least it's a start. After all was said and done, this is the outline of the first level. This first area is going to be used as the tutorial section, so that the player can get used to the controls without having to worry about dying in the first few minutes of the game. Although I did want to introduce the player into the traps pretty early, which led me to adding spikes to the ground in certain areas, as well as making the Hallway of Fire, of course. As you can see, there's still a lot that needs to be filled in, but I figured I'd save some of that for the next episode, since around this part is when I want to add some enemies for the players to kill. So if you enjoyed watching, make sure to smack that like button, and stay tuned for the next episode. I'm going to start trying to upload these devlogs every week, so if you haven't subscribed yet, then you might not catch the next episode when it comes out. Anyways, thank you for watching, and have an awesome dinner.